Chapter 3. Sin woke up early and was outside in the backyard, running with the dogs as she always did. She had no style, no form. She jumped over rocks, she raced around bushes, she tossed balls for the dogs, but mostly she kept her body moving, always in a forward motion. For some reason, Ethan slipped into her mind. He'd have a heyday with her running style. He looked like the kind who went left, right, steady for at least 5 miles before taking a break. Whereas she'd stop, scoop up a ball, run some more, toss the ball, keep on running, dashing around to the left, stopping to throw the dogs off the trail, and then keep on going once more. She liked to have fun, and a straight jog from point A to point B wasn't enough fun for her. The dogs stopped for a drink while she jogged on the spot. Normally a creek flowed heavily beside her property, but it was almost dry this year. The drought had taken the creek down to just a small trickle. When she figured they'd had enough time to quench their thirst, she jumped the creek bed and carried on up the other side, the dogs at her heels. When she was about worn out, she turned and headed back toward the house. Now she'd go in a straight line home again. By the time she hit the gate at the back of her property, her footsteps had slowed to a walk, and she could feel her uneven breath, hot and raspy. She let herself and the dogs into the yard, walking even more slowly to the house. She had a lot of work to do today. But Ethan kept sitting in the back of her mind. She wondered what he was up to and how the shepherd was doing. Before she realized it, her fingers dialed the clinic. They weren't open yet, but she knew Megan well and called her personal number. As soon as Megan answered, Sin asked, "How is the shepherd doing?" "Which one?" Megan asked in a wry tone. "This appears to be Shepherd Week." Sin chuckled. "It's so bizarre how that works. Hey, it's the same for all facets of life. It's like in the maternity ward. They have baby girls upon baby girls, and then, all of a sudden, it switches to baby boys." "I meant the shepherd Ethan brought in." "Ah, that one," Megan said, a smile coming through the phone. "She's doing better than she deserves to be. She slept through the night. We've increased her medications for the pain, now that she's back to awareness. I expect Ethan to be on the front steps of the clinic at any moment, since we open soon. At least he cares." "Right, and you can't stop thinking about him, can you?" Megan teased. "Do you want me to tell you when he gets here, so you can come around?" "Nope. I expect he'll stop by here afterward anyway," she said. "Thanks for letting me know about the shepherd." She hung up to avoid answering further questions and sat here for a long moment, wondering about where Ethan'd gone. But it really wasn't any of her business. It was so hard not to be curious. He was a loner by all the things she knew about him. Everything about him made her curious. He'd arrived out of nowhere and didn't seem to have any connection to anyone or a job around here, but he knew a lot of people. She was happy he'd found the dog, or the shepherd might not have made it. What Sin needed to do was get back to work. She was part of a global canine rescue group. Currently, they were bringing 20 dogs over from Greece. The country had hit a rough patch, and the animals, as well as the people, had suffered. The locals dumped their pets because they could no longer afford to care for them. Now starving packs of dogs ran loose in the streets, causing all kinds of mayhem. She needed 1 or 2 shelters to take them, until they could be adopted. She was avoiding the states that had kill centers. No point in bringing a dog over here just to be killed. At the same time, she knew a lot of people were against what she was doing, because so many local dogs also needed to be looked after. That was also why she had centers in Canada and England that she worked with. Canada was always good for at least half of the animals. They had way less people, but a lot more were willing to take in rescues. Considering that, she sent off an email to the 3 centers she worked with regularly, confirming the numbers of animals they were willing to take. While she waited for responses, which weren't likely to come until the end of the day, she got up and made herself a shake for breakfast. She knew that Ethan's shepherd wouldn't move for quite a while, so she wondered if Ethan would stick around. Did he have a place where he could look after the dog's medical needs? She sent Louise a text, asking if the shepherd needed a home while it recovered. Sin could surely do something. She sent a second text, asking if Anna would be looking after the shepherd. Surprisingly, Louise answered quickly. Ethan is taking her. But not for a few more days. She needs to be mobile and given medications. But that can be done at home, right? Sure, but her bowels have to move smoothly. She doesn't leave until then. Acknowledging that with a text back, Sin got down to work. If Ethan would take the shepherd, that was all good. Ethan was at the vet's office 10 minutes before it opened. He got out of his vehicle, locked the truck, and stood at the front door. He knew people were inside, but he didn't move from his position. They'd either let him in or not, but he wasn't budging until he had a chance to see the shepherd. He wasn't there but 5 more minutes when the door opened, and he saw Louise on the other side. She smiled at him and said, "She's doing fine." He looked at her, searching for the truth in her eyes, then asked, "May I see her?" She nodded, let him in, and then locked the door behind him. He frowned. "Letting me in is not a good practice." She chuckled. "Now you sound like my partner and the rest of the gang in my life." "Who's your partner?" he asked, curious if he knew him. "Rory. He works for Levi." Ethan nodded. He knew many of Levi's men, but not Rory in particular. "Are you working for Levi too?" "I don't think so," Ethan said. "I'm not sure what I'm doing at the moment." It was the truth, but sounded worse when spoken out loud. "I am on an assignment for someone else at the moment." "Ah," Louise said with a smile. "I think all the men who work for Levi worked for someone else." Not sure what to say to that, Ethan said nothing and followed her through to the surgery room and beyond. He studied the gleaming surgical tables, rows of instruments, cupboards, panels of parts used in surgery. They walked to a wall of cages. There were cats, dogs, bunnies, and he was surprised to see a ferret. "She's down here," Louise said. She crouched in front of a large dog crate that had a name tag and a clipboard attached with the details of the animal inside. She opened the front so he could see the shepherd huddled in the back. He crouched in front of her. The dog whined as in recognition. He reached out a hand and laid it on her forehead calmly. The shepherd didn't move, her eyes were glazed with pain. Louise checked her over while he gave her what comfort he could. "Any idea how long she'll be here?" "A couple days," Louise said. "I need to make sure that she can walk and that her bodily functions work properly. And we have to confirm she's not bleeding anymore. I won't be happy until I can see her walking around the parking lot on her own steam. Animals heal much faster than people do. Humans make healing hard work." He could feel her odd look at his comment, but he meant it. Animals were simple. When they needed care or they needed food, they were happy to get it. He gently stroked between the shepherd's eyes, his fingers soft, comforting. "She recognizes you," Louise commented. "Accepts you." "I didn't hurt her," he said. "That already marks me as one of the good guys." He heard Louise's heavy sigh. "Unfortunately, you're quite right there. Do you have much history on her?" "Not yet," he said, stroking the soft ears as she lay here with her eyes closed, allowing him to touch her. "But I will." "Without getting hurt yourself, I hope," she said, her tone sharp. His only response was to stare at her. She sighed. "No point in talking to you on this issue, is there?" "Any point in talking to Rory or Stone or any of the other men?" She chuckled. "No. Not about stuff like this." She straightened. "If you'd like, you can sit here. But I can't move her, so please only touch her head and keep her calm. My assistant will come in and change her dressings again later." He nodded. "I'll stay with her for a few minutes." Louise nodded and checked on several other animals while he watched with interest. He dropped his gaze to the shepherd. She had her eyes closed, relaxing. His fingers stroked down her nose and back up between her eyes and over to gently caress her long silky ears. "What happened to you, girl?" he asked softly. Her ears twitched at his tone of voice, so he kept talking to her gently, if for nothing else than to get her to remember his voice. That would be huge. Speaking calmly, he told her that he would look after her, and that the worst of her life was over. But she had to heal, she had to fight and get back up on her feet. Nothing worse than an animal that gave up. He was fully aware that Louise kept an ear and an eye on him, and that was fine until people understood who he was, what he was. Their uncertainty was expected at first. He'd be the same regardless. But he instinctively knew exactly who Louise was right from the moment he'd seen her handle the dog. She was one of those rare individuals where the animals came first. He was similar. "I think she's sleeping now," Louise said. With a start, he realized she was checking on the shepherd's vitals. "She's doing very well, but we need to give her a couple days to just heal." He nodded and stood. Louise locked the cage. With one last look at the dog, his voice slightly thicker than he liked, he said, "Thank you." She nodded. "I've yet to find an animal that doesn't break my heart when they're in here." "I don't think I could do your work," he said. "It's hard for me too at times, but it's been my calling since forever. Like you, but in a different way." "I had years in the military K9 unit," he said, his voice catching. "But I lost my K9 partner in a bad accident. I've been recovering ever since." "Maybe it's time for a new K9 partner," she said with a nod to the sleeping shepherd. "And maybe a new line of employment." He cracked a smile. "Yeah, that's partly the reason I'm here. I'm not sure what I want to do. Law enforcement can always use dog handlers. Don't think I could do straight police work." "Well, I know Levi doesn't have a dog handler. Set up your own company, contract out to him. And of course, there's always the military." He gave her a thoughtful look. "Not sure what would be involved in setting up a company like that. Although, if I do go in that direction, Badger, from the group that sent me here, could possibly use my services too." "That might be your first step," she said with a bright smile, ushering them forward, "to investigate what would be required." "I also have to train dogs to have employable skills," he said with a quirk of his lips. "Not to mention, a lot of K9 work would end up being voluntary. Like emergency search and rescue work. Not all counties or families can afford to pay." "I guess it depends if you need the money or not," she said with a sideways look at him. "Besides, once your company is up and running, you could decide what constituted volunteer work. Maybe a portion of your business will end up being volunteer-based." "True. I don't know how I could make this work at the moment." He shrugged. She smiled. "Then let me give you the name and number of somebody in town here who has a lot of connections." "Who's that?" "I was thinking of Flynn's best friend, Logan." "Gunner's son," Ethan said with a nod. "He's on my list of people to contact anyway." She stopped in the act of writing down Logan's name on a notepad. "You know Gunner?" He nodded. "I know Gunner. I'm on my way to visit him this morning." She straightened. "Obviously, you have plenty of connections on your own. In that case, say hi to him for me." "I will. Take good care of the dog for me." "Absolutely," she said. "When you come back, you better have a name for her. Once you've named her, she's yours because you won't be able to let her go." He turned and walked out of the clinic. It was still early, but the front doors were now open, and a couple vehicles were pulling into the parking lot. Perfect time for him to leave. He hopped into his truck, turned on the engine, and backed out. Time to talk to Gunner. As he turned the truck around and headed toward the exit, his phone buzzed. He pulled off to the side and read the message. "If you're around, stop by," Levi texted. "I heard from Stone and Badger that you were in town." Ethan thought about it for a moment, then dialed the phone. When Levi answered, he said, "It's Ethan. I'm meeting Gunner in an hour." "Good," Levi said. "Stop by this afternoon then." "Not sure when that'll be," Ethan said cautiously. "Doesn't matter when it is," Levi said. "The door's always open." He hung up. With a smile, Ethan tossed the phone on the seat beside him and turned onto the highway. It was nice to know Levi was here. Now to meet with Gunner. That old soldier had fingers in many pots. What was the chance he knew something about that property Sin mentioned? And would he know anything about K901?